Ireland may be the first country to legalize gay marriage by constitutional amendment when voters go to the polls on Friday. I'm joined by sociology professor Mark McCormack of Durham University. Mark, how significant is this vote in the overall battle for gay rights, and do you think it will be approved?
Whether it gets approved or not, I think, is still waiting to be seen on Friday. There had been a big margin. That margin is narrowed, so it'll be interesting to see, and obviously pollsters can get it wrong, as we found in the recent UK elections. In terms of the broad significance, the key significance is around the fact that this will be people voting in favour, kind of for the legalisation, rather than voting against, which has been what's happened previously in the US. I think the key issue, though, is that this is part of a trend of legalising or making marriage equal across the world. Obviously, we're seeing shifts in homophobia, some negative in some particularly African and Middle Eastern countries. But when you look at the West, there's a clear trend towards legalising and approving of same-sex marriage.
And what is that going to mean, not just for society overall, but for the way we view economies in some of these countries that have made a step forward?
You know, I think that's kind of something that is hard to say precisely because this is a new thing, particularly a country doing it rather than states. And in the US, there's been some interesting issues with economy, some kind of big companies and big associations saying they won't hold their conferences or have their kind of bring money to states which are anti-same-sex marriage, and so there's some issues there where it can be a hindrance. But we've also seen some individual companies who make a stand against kind of gay issues actually getting supported by religious organisations, etc. So there's some interesting complexity where we don't quite know where it will go. I think there's some interesting issues as well related to potentially in two ways related to gay issues and inequalities. The first is that legalising gay marriage and same-sex marriage actually says something about inclusivity, about diversity, about the kind of country that you are. And that potentially has the potential to attract people in tourist ways. It says something about kind of the inclusivity and may kind of increase tourism and people coming to that country. The other interesting thing that might happen, and this is just hypothesising, is kind of devaluing almost the pink pound. The pink pound has been discussed as being this thing that exists for well-off people, partly because they don't have the responsibilities of childhood, they don't have marriage expenses. If this is part of a trend towards gay couples taking on the normalcy of heterosexual unions, etc., they may find that they have less spare cash because they're spending it more on marriage and those other associated costs with it.
Tell me a little bit about how interesting the battle is in Ireland, where you have a very vocal Prime Minister, in many ways pitted against the Catholic Church.
Yes, and you know, one of the interesting things here, and what makes Ireland kind of unique or different from the UK and different from many other European countries, is the strength of kind of religious feeling and kind of the history of religion and religious rights in that country, which perhaps makes it more similar to some of the US states where there's also kind of strong religious emphasis. What will be interesting to find out, and why we'll see in this debate, and will be interesting looking at what happens after the votes are cast and after we see how the numbers actually went, is who kind of still has that influence. We know the religious influence is waning in some ways. It used to be, obviously, with the Catholic Church kind of not forbidding condoms. There are, in the UK in particular, but still also Ireland, decreasing numbers of large families. You go to the Catholic schools in the UK, very few of these families have 5, 6, 7 children, which kind of shows that the Pope isn't being listened to, or the Catholic Church isn't being listened to in the way that it once was, related to kind of sexual norms around condoms. Does the Church have this power related to same-sex marriage and equal rights for marriage? The interesting counterpart with this is there seems to be a clear trend in the US that when President Obama came out in support of gay marriage, and the way he came out in support of it seemed to help persuade more people about that same-sex marriage should be legal, and that's shown in the surveys over in the US. We don't know yet who will be the victor, but it leads to interesting questions around whether it's the church or whether it's the state and government and politics that has more influence in persuading people.
You've raised some interesting issues with us. Professor Mark McCormack of Durham University, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Rhonda Schaffler for TheStreet.